Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we'll go through the forecast for September the 15th through the 21st. And this is a pretty momentous week here. We have an eclipse that is happening this week, the first of two for this season, as well as a couple other major aspects that we'll want to keep in mind this week. But before we dive into it, if you are new here, please feel free to subscribe. We cover long-term transits, political and mundane astrology, as well as these weekly forecasts. So if that is something that is of interest to you, then do stick around by subscribing. And if you don't mind hitting the thumbs up button, that really helps me out with the algorithm. It helps the channel to grow. So I very much appreciate that. And it indicates to me what kind of content you want to see more of. So without any further introduction, let's dive into it for this week. So for the week of September 15th through the 21st, we will have several things that will stick with us throughout the entire week. We have this culminating moon phase, so the moon is waxing until we get to that eclipse point with the full moon, and then it will be waning off from that. We will have a sense of needing to complete things. I've personally felt since I would say the last week, almost as though there's some sort of false deadline that's being run up against. So if you're feeling that way, it's probably due to the fact that this moon is waning up to an eclipse. So this is going to be causing our emotions to run very high, and we may feel a major sense of relief as we exit that eclipse phase and start moving into this waning moon leading up to the new moon eclipse that we'll be experiencing the first week of October. But with that said, we also have some other important aspects that we need to keep in mind. So Mercury is opposite to Saturn this week, and that will give us a general sense of that there's some difficulties to solve, that there's some challenges that we're up against, and we need to mentally work our way through it and figure out plans, step-by-step plans as to how to accomplish certain things. So time management, workflow, and how to structure our days in order to be as productive as possible is going to be something that is coming up for us all throughout this entire week. We may also see delays with that, especially in terms of communication or with commutes. We may also see some major transportation or communication breakdowns or delays in the world in terms of mundane astrology. That may be something that we see quite a bit during this week. Additionally, we have this outer planet kite to the sun. So let me point this out here. We have the sun is on the 15th at 23 degrees of Virgo, and that's opposite to here Neptune at 28 degrees of Pisces, and it's trine to Pluto at 29 degrees of Capricorn, and it's also trine to Uranus at 27 degrees of Taurus, and then these are all making trines and sextiles to each other, and that is how we get this kite, this very messy kite that I've just created on the screen here. And so that's going to be building up for us all week. And what that's bringing up to us is our place in the world. So we're sorting that out as we're sorting out all of the challenges that we need to plan around and that we need to solve in terms, especially of our long-term goals, because as we'll see, as this sun continues to move, or as this Mercury rather, continues to move farther into Virgo, we'll see that square Jupiter as well, which is triggering the square between Jupiter and Saturn, which is bringing up questions around our vision for our future, a lot of revisioning needing to be done, restructuring our plans in order to make them more sustainable for us long term. And so with Mercury coming into that position, it's bringing those things up for us again, but it is additionally solving a lot of those problems for us. It's bringing it up for us to solve with Mercury here. So this is a major crux in this long-term transit of about a year of this square between Saturn and Jupiter here. So it's coming to a very especially critical point during this week, but it's very helpful. So again, our relationship to society is really being questioned here. So those big goals that we have, those big dreams that we have, is that something around how we want for our life to fit into the world, and how we want to relate to others, and how we want to see ourselves in the world, our general vision for our lives broadly, and how that fits into everything is something that's coming up for us very strongly today, or throughout this week, rather. Additionally, throughout this whole week, we will see that the nodes here, here's one, and then the other is right around here. Those are square to Mars. And so that is also bringing us to a rather critical point. It's making action very, very poignant. So I would be very careful around the actions that you take. Try very hard during this time not to be reckless. And the reason for that is that I guess I could have made some effort to actually draw a south node here instead of just a little squiggle. But the nodal axis, it is, for one, generally quite karmic, but it also reacts. It's straightening things out. It's evening things out. It's balancing things out in a very fated way and in a very long-term significant way. So the actions that we take, for better or worse, can have very long-term effects when it's coming into this square. And we'll be experiencing that again all week. So we want to be very careful about the actions that we take and make sure that they're not in conflict at all, that we're not working at cross purposes, again, with these visions that we have, with these things that we're working toward throughout this period of time as well. And again, that can also bring up issues around aggression. This could come through in our personal lives, especially if this is somehow transiting some major part of your chart. So if you have important placements in the first decan of the cardinal signs, so Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, or Aries here, the first decan, the first like 10 degrees or so, then that could be something that you encounter, some sort of aggressive person. And I would definitely, if I were you, try especially hard not to be aggressive. But this, again, in terms of mundane astrology, this is something that I see very, very likely playing out on the world stage. Something to do with violence, something to do with reckless action, something to do with impulsive or emotional action that is taken without considering the long-term consequences, and then there being long-term consequences due to that. So that's something that we also want to watch out for throughout this period of time. Now, Venus will also be opposite to Chiron. See that Chiron is at 22 degrees and retrograde, which means that it is mutually applying here to Venus in an opposition. And we will be experiencing that both applying and then also separating as Venus gets beyond that point throughout this week. And this can bring up issues of trauma or wounds to be healed around relationships, how your relationships tend to go, how you expect for them to go based on past experience. There can be a trigger to some sort of trauma that you have throughout this period of time. And I would invite you to see that as an opportunity to address that on an emotional level, to try to heal around that. That's something that we have available to us throughout this week. But again, in terms of mundane astrology, this could bring up major questions around women's issues. We've been seeing this quite a bit in recent months as matters of importance to women generally, especially in the US election, have been really coming to the fore and have been being discussed very critically. And we should be seeing a lot more of that in the coming week or so as well. Now that Venus is also going to be applying a square throughout most of this week to Pluto at 29 degrees of Capricorn here, and this is also not very comfortable. So fortunately, we will continue to have this waning trine from Jupiter helping out Venus here to maybe see the brighter side of things, but it's getting into some pretty complicated situations. And there's even a T-square that we will see as this square unfolds between Venus and Pluto, between that opposition of Venus to Chiron and Pluto. So questions around power dynamic and coercion, especially in personal relationships, but also just in terms of your boundaries in general. Venus also has to do a lot with our own personal self-esteem and how we see ourselves, and therefore the types of relationships that we tend to get into. And so this is bringing up questions around that of controlling aspects of relationships, and do we give away some of our power or some of our control in those settings? Do we people please? That can be something that can come up in a very strong way here. There could be someone that's really letting you down because you have given to a certain extent to them and you expected for them to reciprocate, and maybe they don't. And certainly the lesson around that would be coming through is try in the future to not overgive before you understand where someone's coming from. So one person that I like quite a bit, he's a tarot reader, Chris Reck, who is on YouTube. He always talks about this in terms of like playing tennis, where you send the energy to someone, and then if they kick it back, then, you've got a game going and you can kick it back to them and they can kick it back to you. But if they're not, hitting the ball back to you, then the ball isn't really in your court to continue to give. So at that point, you would probably want to not give anymore so that you're not setting yourself up for some sort of situation of resentment. So if that's something that you do, I am absolutely a recovering people pleaser, so I would very much understand that. Then this is something that may be coming up for you in, again, a very poignant way. There's a lot of poignancy to this week. It's a very important week, but it's bringing up a lot of major questions for us around how our lives are shaped by the way that we see ourselves, and therefore the way that we interact with people based on what we think that we deserve. So with all of that said, let's get into the day today. So for September 15th, we have a very lovely aspect pattern here that I've been trying not to refer to yet because it was in that previous screen, but it's so lovely and I'm so excited about it. This is a grand air trine that is forming between the Moon and Venus and Jupiter. Just absolutely perfectly, really, really lovely, wonderful energy here. This is stunning for relationships. You should be able to have a really good time with people if you spend time outside. If you don't usually, I would try to get it out, even just going to the park or any sort of social interactions that you can have. It should be really overwhelmingly positive. And it's also just bringing up a general feeling of comfort and ease, and like things aren't quite so serious as they often feel like they are. This is a very lighthearted energy, but it's not lighthearted in the sense of being reckless. There's not reckless action here. These are air signs. They're very logical. They're very social. They're communicative. They tend to see things quite clearly, but this doesn't only have to be experienced through other people is kind of what I'm trying to get at. So even when you are on your own, you should be feeling like, even if you don't have all of the answers to your future yet, that you're on the right track and that things are going well. You should be feeling an overall sense of goodwill and optimism for the future. And this is actually also bringing up, it's a kite that's actually forming because of that opposition to Venus here. Let me look a little closer. So we have that opposition, and then the moon is also sextile to Chiron, and Chiron is sextile to Jupiter. So we have a second kite here. This is a day of two kites. Let us put it that way. And so this is also easing us into some of the big questions that we're going to have around those relationship dynamics later on in the week when Venus starts to really move into aspect with Pluto. And so this could even be part of the reason why you would want to overgive and why you would wind up in that situation. And so it may be kind of a blessing in disguise, where if you overgive to some extent on this day, then yeah, in a few days when you're expecting to receive back on that, maybe you aren't, or maybe it's not going quite as you expected, and that may be illuminating something really important to you. So these kind of uncomfortable things that come up in our lives, I'm sure you know, are definitely opportunities for growth. And the fact that it's coming off of this pattern, this kite pattern, that is really wonderful and is really expressing in and of itself a goodwill to us in general in its action. If the action related to that is overgiving, then ultimately that is for a good cause. It is to teach you that thing. It's not to give that away or to necessarily create that as a ripple effect, but rather to bring something to light out of compassion to you. So, and of course, most relationships likely are just going to go swimmingly. And so you won't really need to worry about that. But if that does come up, it's probably coming out of this aspect pattern as well, because of that kite, because it's triggering that opposition between these two in a very excellent way. Now, additionally, on the 15th of September, we have that moon, which is in Aquarius here, is square to Uranus, which is in Taurus. And this can bring up a very, very dynamic tension where you may feel this strong urge for freedom and to kind of break out of something, to be kind of liberated from something. It could also come up as a sense of excitement, which could translate to a sense of anxiety. So if you do have those feelings of this is going to probably feel really wonderful, and this is going to bring up like little sparks of energy and excitement as well. And so if for you that tends to translate straight into anxiety, then do try to understand that there's a lot of really good energy here, and it's probably that that's what you're feeling and you're just kind of reacting to it. So I would watch out for any sort of disagreements because, again, remember throughout this whole week, emotions are running pretty high. And because this is such a wonderfully charged, but charged nonetheless, day here, if someone comes into disagreement with you, it can be incredibly sharply apparent to you. And I would try very hard to not feel the need to make any more of that disagreement than it has to be. So I wouldn't necessarily dig into, for instance, a relationship, like the broad strokes of a relationship, just because you're disagreeing about where you want to go eat, or just because someone, kind of gives you a bit of a tone or something like that. So I would watch out for those disagreements. Just try not to let them snowball, because one thing that Uranus can do, and it's in a sharp aspect here, we do want to watch out for squares and stuff with our emotions. This can cause separations, like emotional separations and things like this. So it can be a big disruptor, but it doesn't have to be if you don't let it snowball. Now, we also have a golden yod that won't be shown here, but we have 2 biquintiles to a quintile. So we have, let's draw this here. We have Saturn to Venus. I'm sorry that I'm so bad at drawing on this thing. And then Uranus to Venus, and that's going to be a biquintile. And then we have a quintile between, ouch. It would have been better to just have all of the lines of all the minor aspects on than trying to draw on this thing. Live and learn. But so we have a quintile aspect pattern right now between Uranus and Saturn, and those are both creating biquintiles to Venus here. And this is wonderful. This has to do with gifts. It has to do with things that go smoother than necessarily was apparently possible due to some sort of skillful handling. So again, this has to do with relationships and how you see yourself. So Venus here, this would be, for instance, a good day to change up your style in a way that maybe people wouldn't necessarily expect with Uranus, but that's working with Saturn. And it may become a pattern that you then engage in, and it was something that you didn't necessarily expect. So if there's something that you've been wanting to wear, but you haven't been able to feel like you could pull it off, because you're able to pull it off today, you may find that, okay, no, this is something that works. It could also be in terms of creative expression. If you are a creative person, if you engage in personal or emotional expression in a hobby or in your work. It should go over very, very well today. And there's just a general sense of, with that square between the moon and Uranus and that kind of urge for freedom and that urge for liberation, there's a way to experience that in a dynamic and enjoyable way if it's handled very well, that offers you both the stability and the kind of loosened boundaries that you're looking for so that you don't feel stifled here, is how that golden yod will play out. And again, a golden yod is a quintile with 2 quintiles off to a third position. And that can also help us in our relationships, anything that is kind of getting a little bit triggered here, but's overall going really beautifully and well. That can offer even more of a helping hand to give you a little bit more perspective on your relationships or within your relationships. So let us go to the 16th, if I can find my cursor here. Okay, so the 16th looks quite a bit different. It looks a little bit weird to me. So we have on this day, the moon is opposite to Mercury, and it's also moving in toward Saturn. So it's joining up on that opposition between them. And we also, of course, have Mercury really moving into orb today with that square with Jupiter. So all of these are really communicating together, but we'll take these that are pretty new today and analyze them a little bit more. So with that opposition between the moon in Pisces and Mercury in Virgo here, you could be a bit of a taskmaster on yourself, and you could feel like you need to solve everything right now. That could also really be because of the fact that things are becoming apparent to you in a very helpful and productive way. But there's a way that we should probably handle this, because again, because of the fact that it is coming into this opposition with Mercury a few hours, really, well, let's see, that's going to be, yeah, it's going to be about a few hours before it comes into the conjunction with Saturn here. We may go into that hyperproductivity mode and think that that's going to be cool, and then wind up really drained from it. So this is really about gaining some sense of balance there. And so that's why I'm saying try to go for taking note of things and to-do lists. One thing is that's going to make Mercury happy. And so it's going to make this go a little bit more smoothly. Because for one thing, this moon in Pisces, it's not necessarily going to want to do a bunch of stuff, but it's probably also going to feel even more of that time crunch as it's coming into that eclipse. And so we don't want to overwhelm this moon too much. And so writing things down and understanding that you can take care of those things in future days. You don't need to solve everything today, because as that moon comes into a conjunction with Saturn in Pisces, it's getting really deep and muddy in the emotions. And so there's a potential to, again, feel really weighed down in the depths of something. And so this could become pretty depressive. The moon with Saturn can be quite depressive. And Pisces isn't completely alien to, melancholy. It's the sign of that. So we want to try not to push the moon too far in that direction. It'll probably naturally lean that way anyway. But if we can just allow ourselves to lightly feel productive today, get done a few things, write down some more things to get done, and then lay off a bit. Because what we're really going to be feeling today, I think, especially coming into that eclipse and the way that the eclipse is already feeling, is time crunch responsibilities. Like, I need to be getting all of this done, or something's weird and, almost a little daunting is going to happen. And I don't think that that's really true, and so that's something that we'll be feeling and that we kind of want to lean away from, because it's just a little bit too heavy. And so again, this could really feel like a case of the Mondays. Like, you don't really want to be doing all of these things, especially with that moon coming into the trine with Mars. You're able to get things done, but we're talking moon in Pisces and Mars in Cancer here. you're probably really going to want to lay down. You're really probably going to be like, why can't this still be Sunday? You know, like, you're going to want another weekend day, likely today, or you're going to be really looking forward to getting home. And so there's a major potential for self-pity. And that's why, I want us to try to be careful to not put too much pressure on ourselves and then feel like somehow because we haven't gotten a beyond human amount of things done on this day that we're feeling down on ourselves. Because one thing that this could be quite lovely for, this is a trine between Moon and Mars and water signs, is you could go home and really enjoy yourself at the end of the day, especially if you're feeling like, okay, I got done what I needed to do. I took note of everything that came to mind that I would like to be doing. And now it's just time to unwind. That's going to be pretty important during this day. So there's an ability to get a lot done, and there's a major urge to get a ton done. But we don't want to burn ourselves out on this day. So on the 17th is our major change day. Now, we do want to always keep in mind with eclipses, yeah, you're feeling them on the day, especially with a full moon eclipse. Full moons in general, if you're the type of person that feels a full moon, which is most people that I know tend to feel a little bit off. And if they know about the moon, or once I tell them that it's a full moon, that it tends to be ascribed to that. Then with an eclipse, that can be really, really especially strong on that day. And again, emotions running high. There can be emotional reactions throughout this period of time. One thing with full moons is I do notice that people tend to, for instance, drive a little bit more recklessly or act slightly more recklessly because of those emotions running high. And so we want to watch out for that in particular because it's an eclipse between Saturn and Neptune. So try not to daydream too much. Don't be distracted driver, things like that. Just try and be pretty careful with all of that. So additionally on this day, and then we'll get into the eclipse a little bit more, we do have that mutable T-square that's coming up for us with Mercury coming into the exact opposition with Saturn. And then that mercurial energy will be moving from that opposition with Saturn to the square with Jupiter. And Jupiter and Saturn have already been in communication. So there's a lot that we know that we need to take care of. It's getting more clear as to how with Mercury. And Mercury's transmitting a lot of that information and a lot of that message about some updates probably from Saturn to Jupiter about that, as these two are currently both moving away from each other, but they'll come back around. And for the coming year, they're going to be making this aspect. So again, solving some problems around sustainability and then the practicality of the goals and figuring out the details of that. So if there's been certain, again, broad strokes that you understand that you need to take care of, but you're not quite sure on the particulars, then today would be a day that those would come through. And it definitely would not be a bad idea to take some time out and think those things through. So look at your big, big long-term goals, all of them, any arena, and try and sit down with pen and paper and either flow of consciousness about it. Mercury can definitely do that, especially when we've got all this Pisces influence here. But try not to judge what comes out. Just write down ideas as to next steps and so forth. You're probably going to want to keep things really organized, but understand that you can organize it afterward if you need to. This can bring through insights on how to do things. So it's very productive and very helpful. It's just that it's going to feel, again, that poignancy, that time crunch that we've been feeling around practical concerns and goals and things like this that are weirdly also pretty abstract. And I've been hearing other people also talking about with this eclipse energy that's coming up. Mercury will be able to shed a lot of light on the solutions that we need around those things in order to put our mind at ease to some extent here. Now, again, as we're moving off of that eclipse and as we're moving off of that opposition, square with Jupiter is fine. We should feel some sense of release and some sense of relief from the tension that I feel has been building up to this eclipse. So, as far as the eclipse goes, we have that also in that position of that outer planet kite that I pointed out, where the sun is opposite to Neptune here, and it is trine to Pluto and to Uranus here. And the moon is joining in on the Neptune part of that pretty much as that is getting really, really close here. So that's going to be felt super strongly on this day. Those big questions about your life going forward, your place in the world, what you want to contribute, all of those things coming really into focus. And then also catalysts arising within certain sectors of your life based on which house this is in. And I just published a video about that, bringing that eclipse through the houses to see which parts of your life are going to be coming up now, but also as these nodes are moving into Pisces and Virgo, because they move backwards, we will continue. This is the first in a series of eclipses. We'll get into that in a second as well. And so there's a specific area of our lives that will need our focus and that will be changing a lot in the coming years. And if you are curious about that, I did just publish a whole video about that. Now, because this is taking place within the context of this aspect pattern as well, this will be having ripple effects and ramifications throughout other aspects of our lives, but it's really the catalysts are within the Virgo and Pisces axis of our chart. So as far as, let's see here, where are we? So this is the actual time of the eclipse over Washington, D.C. But so we have that moon again at 2540 of Pisces and the sun at 2540 of Virgo here. And we have that kite pattern. So again, this is the first in the Pisces Virgo series here. And that will be going forward from now through February of 2027. The last time that we had this exact pattern where the North Node was in the Pisces general area and we were having Pisces Virgo eclipses was in 2006 through 2007. I believe that was June through December. And so you might want to look back on that time, see what was going on in your life and what were the catalysts that you were dealing with throughout that period of time in order to see how this might play out along similar lines, but not exactly the same. And this may be developments upon the major breakthroughs that you had in your life during that period of time as well. And then we had the North Node was in Virgo, and so creating similar but slightly different flavors of eclipses and having similar but slightly different impacts upon our lives in 2015 through 2017 as well. So let's just look at this real quick as far as the axis that we're dealing with here, because this is important. So with the Pisces Virgo axis, what comes up is questions around health, mind and body, psychologically, emotionally, physically, spiritually, health in all forms, boundaries as well. Both of these signs tend to have trouble with and a need to build stronger boundaries throughout their lives, because these are both very service-oriented and caretaking signs here. They tend to overgive and they tend to have pretty weak boundaries. So this can be something that we're really asked to strengthen in the coming years, or to make more healthy at least. If we have reactive boundaries because of things that we've gone through and learned from, but maybe we've overcorrected in a sense, then that could be another way that that could become more healthy to balance that out. These are also both very intuitive signs. So hunches, instincts, just feelings about things. I would say especially during this day, really listen to your intuition and your instincts and see what it is that you're feeling. I wouldn't necessarily act on things immediately, especially because of the fact that we still have that square between Mars and the nodes, and the nodes become very important during an eclipse. So action could be a little bit problematic, but you should be able to get some really strangely clear, in ways that you probably can't quite describe, insights on things through intuition and instincts. Spirituality and practical plans. So your big dreams and visions for your life, as well as any sort of spiritual inclinations that you may have, and then grounding those into reality in some way. So that's also in part why this is the axis of charity. So compassion and spiritual concepts of, what's one's place in the world and how should one contribute to the world, and then bringing that into the real world in a compassionate way tends to come through as charity or giving or, donation of time, volunteering and things like this as well, and taking care of people and so on and so forth. So this axis also is related to collecting and deconstructing. So with Pisces, there's a strong urge toward universalizing things. So really wanting to bring everything together, making sure that everything is included in all sorts of plans, but that can get pretty muddy. It can get just too disorganized when you're trying to make sure that, everything is perfectly pleased and that everything can be considered all at once within a single framework. And Virgo is more likely to try to figure out why something isn't fitting into a framework. And maybe we need a separate framework for that. And it's okay if these things aren't necessarily fully overlapping. It will want to do things in a way that's much more correct and factual and data oriented. What are the actual facts that we're dealing with? And what does that imply about what it is that we're trying to build up or break down or whatnot, rather than with Pisces where it's just all and everything all the time, all things all the time, pretty much with Pisces there. So I just kind of wanted to review that. I did, again, 2 episodes over this eclipse at this point. So if you're curious at all more about that, then I will also link to those in the description and probably around on the video. So the day after this eclipse and after that opposition perfecting between Mercury and Saturn, there's an interesting cardinal square that is perfecting, that one that I've been referring to some extent, where, let's see if it would be even remotely possible. Boop and doop and yay. Okay. So South Node here. I did it. That's around 7 degrees. Let's see if I mess this up. Of Libra. And so we have a T-square that is forming where these nodes are always in opposition to each other, but the moon is coming into conjunction with the North Node and opposition with the South Node here. So that is our opposition. And then all of this is going to be square to Mars here. So this is why it is especially potent today, because the moon is also involved and it's heightening everything. It's also just come off of that eclipse. So again, as far as taking action's concerned with this eclipse, if it seems impulsive, I would kind of caution against it right now, because this is where ramifications come through. Again, these are they're not scales of balance, but they're karmic. And so when something needs a reaction and the nodes are getting triggered by something, they're going to get a reaction. So this does catalyze a response. And that's why we want to be a little bit careful here. This moon also is ruled by, it's actually in mutual reception with Mars, which is especially interesting. And I'm so glad that I just noticed that, because for some reason I overlooked that here. So we have the moon and Mars are in mutual reception, which is to say the moon is in Mars's sign of Aries and Mars is in the moon sign of Cancer. So this is really, it's just especially heightened here. And there's, again, that cause and effect. It can become very clear how to put those plans and those ideas that you've been working on the past few days and for a while now, I'm sure, into action. That can become clear today. But what can also come up today in a very potent way is irritability and a major desire to make changes, to have things that are bothering you no longer be bothering you. And so again, there can be an impulsiveness here that isn't completely rational and may not get the best reaction. And because of the fact that we're dealing with very, very sensitive nodes right now in this very sharp aspect pattern. I personally would be just very careful about any sort of impulsive action, especially if anything is aggressive in that or out of the blue. I wouldn't be acting out of the blue during this period of time as well. But again, yeah, we could have some definite irritability between these two, which are both just really like, no, I really need for things to be the way that I'm wanting for them to be, because this is also cardinal. And they're also both, they're in positions that they're uncomfortable with, but they are a little bit predisposed to also giving into each other because they're both in each other's homes and they're both in aspect to each other. So they both are fueling and feeding that same urge, that same beast within that really wants to have something probably now because of the very strength of these two planets here. So it's something that we want to be a little bit careful about. There could be a bit of afterglow with this as well, where with that moon coming into contact with the North Node, more of that eclipse revelation is becoming clear and it's continuing to come through on this day. So there could be, again, a bit of an afterglow also with the fact that we have just, if you remember, like I was saying, once the moon moves on from the eclipse and it's no longer in opposition with that sun in that tense and dynamic way. But additionally, once we get Mercury a little bit beyond this exact opposition with Saturn, especially once it's no longer partile, which takes a little bit longer, but then that Mercury is coming into a square with Jupiter. And that's fine. That's feeling actually quite good about what we're capable of doing. And it's also giving us the drive and the impetus and the interest, the curiosity, the psychological interest to kind of go after things. So this can be a bit of an afterglow, especially if you're not getting triggered by first decan of the cardinal signs transits here. And this is just kind of something that's happening in the sky and with some people around you. Then this may feel like a pretty nice afterglow where we can kind of like, okay, relax a little bit. And also come into a little bit more clarity with the moon coming into the North Node. But for some people, this is really going to feel quite tense. So that's the 18th. Okay, so for the 19th of September, this is a pretty intense day because we have another cardinal T-square. It's a completely different cardinal T-square, but it's still involving the moon. So the moon is just like, it's at least not going through an eclipse, but it's not getting much of a break in these coming days because we have these pretty big cardinal placements right now that it's then, as it goes through Aries, having to contend with here. So it's coming into that conjunction with Chiron here. It's coming into opposition with Venus and into square with Pluto here. So with Pluto at what is essentially the apex, again, of a T-square with these two here, this T-square, it's bringing a sense of intensity and a kind of deep desire to transform or to deepen, or alternatively, if that's not possible, possibly then to like kind of blow up relationships a little bit. And because this is such deeply emotional energy, there's definitely a risk of that implied here, because Pluto will either want something to be perfectly clear and pure and deep and just really 100%, or it's just going to want to tear it down so that it can build it back up so that it can be 100% exactly correct and pure and exactly what it wants, you know? So Pluto is very intense in that way, and especially in a cardinal sign like Capricorn, and it's coming into these very sensitive planets here of Venus, the moon, Chiron. I mean, this is basically all of the emotions are right on the sleeve and they're getting triggered pretty strongly. So again, this playing out as like a desire to transform or deepen sentiments. And this is probably going to be related, given the planets that are involved here, with your relationships or yourself. This may be a deep desire, deep desire to change something about yourself. And it may be a part of yourself that you feel gets wounded. And so you're wanting to change it so that it no longer does. And of course, we want to remain vulnerable as people in general, but sometimes, yes, if we wear our hearts on our sleeve a little bit too much about certain things, then we may really feel the need to either strengthen our resolve and our conviction in that so that we don't get shaken by things that kind of poke at those vulnerabilities, or to create stronger boundaries around them so that they don't get triggered as much. So additionally, subjects of intense interest to you. So if there's something that you're like particularly obsessed with, that's an interest or a topic or a hobby or something like that, there can be a real depth of wanting to perfect it, especially in terms of form and emotional content and expressive content with these involved on this day. And so this would be, if you are a creative, again, another great day to engage in that and kind of see what comes through, because there's going to be much more of a depth of emotion and almost an urgency of emotion that will be expressed into it, which could be quite interesting. But if you are even just interested in any other kind of hobby, building things or even research into particular topics or certain genres or something, there's a desire here to almost binge and to get really deeply involved in something in a way that you don't necessarily usually, to an extent that you don't necessarily usually. Now, if you're feeling a little emotional, it's not 100%, it definitely doesn't have to play out this way, but if you're going out with people and having fun, I would be a little careful not to overdo it with these kinds of energies, but that's definitely not a way that it has to play out. Additionally, because of the depth and intensity of this and the fact that it's digging up a lot of emotional content, and then also a lot of content of old traumas and wounds and things, this can be a really wonderful time for self-analysis. These are also very important placements for learning about oneself. Again, self-worth and self-esteem with Venus with regard to oneself, but also within the context of relationships, the emotions and the memory, the emotional memory of oneself with the moon here, and then the wounding and healing and learning and teaching that Chiron brings to the table. You can definitely get some really wonderful insights with regard to your own psyche, the way that you feel about yourself and the way you feel about others. So there could be a major catalyst for, intense healing experiences if you do engage in some sort of self psychoanalysis or emotional analysis, or kind of kindly and compassionately interrogate your own feelings about certain things. And yeah, I mean, this may be a really wonderful day to have a good cry. And if that were to happen, then I feel like it would be probably pretty cathartic and satisfying. Pretty intense day there. So on the 20th of September, we're coming into a little bit more balance here, or at least we have the opportunity to. So we have the moon is in a sextile with Mars here, and it's moving on from that T-square. This is now waning as far as the moon is concerned, and it's coming into just really that sextile. And this is between Taurus and Cancer. So there's a desire to nurture the self and others. And that may be a really excellent way to kind of express this today. So, cooking a meal for family, spending time with family, especially if you feel like you've done some really interesting healing and releasing over the past few days. This could be a really wonderful day to just kind of get together with people that you care about, or even just take care of yourself in a really kind and nurturing way. And also do try to make some time for relaxation during this day, because these will want to relax. Again, we have a situation here where, similar to the trine when the moon was in Pisces, there might not be a total desire to act and to get things done, but there's a possibility to, so you can get things done, especially with this exact square now between Mercury and Jupiter. but eventually you will just want to release and unwind. So that's something that I think it would be really wonderful to take some time out to do, especially maybe in the evening. But again, we do have that Mercury square to Jupiter. So again, thinking and working clearly, and with, again, that level of curiosity and genuine interest in solving problems that can be really more than half the battle. That is coming through very organically here, especially if you have mutable placements in Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces, or Gemini, then this is coming through in a very nice and probably relieving way, coming off of both the opposition to Saturn that's been strong for you, and then that eclipse, which has been strong for you as well. So this is kind of a like, okay, knowing what you need to do and just being able to get on with it in a way that's a little bit healthier and a little bit less like, oh my God, I need to get this done by some arbitrary, abstract time frame that I feel is like somehow being imposed on me from on high or something, you know? But there is still a little bit of that productive tension, if I can find my cursor here, between, you know, the details that Mercury rules and the big picture that Jupiter can bring to things as well. So getting really lost in the details, I think, with that opposition to Saturn and getting weighed down by them, now we can fit those details into the bigger picture and see how they fit together, again, in a way that fosters a lot of curiosity and productivity. Now, lastly, we have the 21st is pretty interesting. We don't have a lot of exact aspects during this day, which is nice. It'll be a little bit of a relief. We're kind of looking forward here to the next phase that Mercury is moving into. But we also have a conjunction between the moon and Uranus here. So, you know, there may be a lot of little disruptions, temporary disruptions that come up throughout the day. Could be a little bit irritating, but could also just kind of keep you on your toes depending on your perspective of it. Again, I don't think that Uranus is a negative planet. I think it plays out the way that it's going to play out, and it doesn't have any negative aspects that it's making right now. It's all flowing aspects and then that conjunction. So it should be perfectly fine. I would say that you will probably feel inclined to like enjoy the routine disruption, the different way that today plays out than it usually necessarily would. And trying something new would be a really wonderful way to experience this as well. This is a Saturday, so you know, if you're able to get out and do something that you haven't done before, this would be a really wonderful way to experience that. You should still be quite open-minded with the waning square between Mercury and Jupiter, and then the waning trine between Venus and Jupiter. There's overall a pretty good feeling here. We have that square between the nodes, and Mars is loosening up now. And I think pretty much everything is moving off of, yeah, everything that's rough is moving away from Chiron right now. It's just the energy is loosening its grip. And so it can be experienced in a multitude of different ways, but it'll be a lot lighter and more pleasant during this day, certainly. So there may be a desire to make some changes in the home. You may want to reorganize with that moon in Taurus coming into Uranus in Taurus. These are both ruled by Venus. Venus is still in its own sign, so that's nice. And you may feel like there's something about your home space that isn't quite aesthetically the way that you want it. And so you may feel that you want to change that during this day too. And that would be another very nice way to allow for this to express here, especially because of the fact that these are, in fact, in a quincunx aspect here, as they are just out of sign of an opposition. And so that can lead to like that there might be something that you want to adjust in the environment, or that's a little bit uncomfortable in the environment. And so you may then feel the need because of that to make the adjustments. Now, looking forward to next week, we have Mercury's next phase coming up next week for sure. We are going to have that Mercury at that eclipse point of 25 degrees and 40 minutes on the 23rd of September. So it will be making a lot of what came up for us during that period of time more clear. So correct action, small action, but very efficient and effectively oriented action toward whatever has come up around that for us. Answers to any questions that arose during that period of time should be coming through as well. But right off of the back of that, what we're going to see is that Mercury is going to come into that exact opposition with Neptune as well. Now, throughout this whole kite period, I should have mentioned a little bit earlier, but we have what's at the crux of that is that opposition to Neptune. And hard aspects, any aspect to Neptune, but especially a hard aspect like an opposition, is going to bring a lack of clarity. So as much as we are involved in a kite here that brings in all of these social influences and the big questions of the big world that are being placed upon us and are kind of asking us what we are going to do about the world, that is also bringing in a very specific way, a lack of clarity around that. So that opposition to Neptune, it brings a murkiness, it brings a bit of a lack of understanding of how to address something. It's something that almost can't be addressed. It's not able to necessarily be known. And so once we get these planets through this kind of nebulous point here and they start to, as they move into Libra, they separate from that. There can be a lot more clarity if you are continuing to feel up in the air, and like you don't quite know what's going on here. Once we move into Libra, those things are going to become a lot more clear. And then we will finally have that Mercury cazimi, which means that it will be exactly conjunct the sun. It will be at the heart of the sun and will become very sharply heightened in the sign of Libra. That will happen on the 30th. So a huge amount of clarity should come through on that day as well. And that should clear up any sort of messes that have been made through the whole, explosive energy of the eclipse that we've just gone through. And it should at least clear us up a little bit in terms of then what we're doing is we're moving straight into the eclipse of the 2nd of October. And that's going to be a new moon eclipse where both the sun and the moon will come all the way around here, and they will be at 10 degrees of Libra. And Mercury at that point will have just gone through that cazimi, and we'll have some fresh questions asked of it with that eclipse. And it will be just beyond that by about a degree. So Mercury is going to be very critical in the next eclipse as well. So all of these things that are coming up with it, what are we not clear about? What has been disrupted and needed to be cleaned up by Mercury there on around the 23rd? And then paying attention on the 30th also, I think, to what Mercury is saying should give us a little bit of foresight into that eclipse to see what's being solved there, because it's going to be one of our later eclipses that will be in the Aries Libra axis. We will have a new moon eclipse again in March, at the end of March, which will be in Aries, but we're moving out of this phase now. So it's kind of time to wrap up the issues that are arising around these Aries Libra eclipses, which has to do with our drive and our kind of independent fighting spirit, and then our need for relationships and our need for for equality and balance within our relationships, as opposed to simply our self-interest, also balancing that with others. Those questions now really kind of need to be wrapped up. So that's what Mercury is going to be addressing as we go forward. And I would say that Mercury is the planet to watch coming up here. So that is what I have for this week. It's looking intense. Now, as far as like an election is concerned, not really, because there's not really a great day to launch anything. There's just too many complications. That eclipse is straight in the middle of that. And then from that point on, what we're dealing with is the in-between of the two eclipses. And that whole period of time can be it's like a purgatory where if you start something necessarily between the eclipses, there's a strong chance that it's not going to really do much. It won't necessarily take any sort of form that you were expecting. So I wouldn't recommend important elections, but I will just remind us, as I will continue to for a while, that as long as Mercury is in Virgo, which I think we just mentioned, yeah, around the 26th, 27th, it's going to be moving into Libra. But as long as that is in Virgo, then the times of day that we want to aim for, just little things that we want to generally go a little bit better than if we had done them during a different time of the day, we still want to look to dawn, because that's when we will have Virgo on the ascendant here. And when we have Virgo on the ascendant, then we will have Gemini culminating. And when we do that, we can get the ascendant and then the midheaven both ruled by that strong Mercury, and we can put Jupiter up at the top of the chart. So around dawn, if there's anything you need to do, that's the best time to do it. But then there's also, you can twist that chart a little bit as well and put, say, Sagittarius on the ascendant, and then what you have is Virgo is culminating, and then you put Gemini in the 7th house, and you have them both angular, and that currently is around 2 to 3 p.m. local time. When I'm saying dawn, and if I said 2 to 3, I meant 1 to 3, about 1 to 3 p.m. your time. Those are going to be the best time frames to do things, because that later one is going to be better for relationships, and then the earlier one is going to be better for anything that you want to bring attention really to you in a way that builds you up, that isn't so much dependent on how others react to it, but just kind of lifts you up. So those are the time frames that you want to aim for each day, really. But as far as anything that's very, very important, I wouldn't necessarily launch it during this whole period of time. So you may get a window of time on the 15th when we have that very lovely kite between Venus, Jupiter, the moon, and the north node as well. Actually, let me run us back to that. There we go. So you could use this kite here, and that could be pretty nice as well. So that's probably going to be in terms of if you are choosing a day. Let me just actually walk this back a little bit. If you are choosing a day, then you will likely want to really emphasize Gemini and Libra, which would mean that you're going to want to aim for either time. You'll want to aim for 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. for relationships, things that you want to go well for relationships. And then you will also want to aim for that dawn chart for career and money. And that's actually a pretty solid chart for career and money. But we have a little bit of complication because of the oppositions with Saturn here. And, you know, there's an ability for things to get disrupted, especially, you know, Mars acting with the nodes and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit messy. If you have to do something and you can do it at any time this week, I would aim for dawn or that bit in the afternoon on the 15th. But for each day, aim for those periods of time for as long as Mercury is in Virgo. And you can't go too terribly wrong as long as you're not launching something important. But yeah, that is what I have for us. I hope that this was helpful. I hope you have a really lovely week. I hope that the eclipse treats you very well. And yeah, again, if you don't mind giving the video a thumbs up, I very much appreciate that. It helps spread it to more people, and that helps the channel to grow. If you would like to share it, I very much welcome that too. And I would say very much thank you about that. And yeah, do stick around for future videos by subscribing. I would love to have you here. And other than that, have a wonderful week, and I will see you soon. Be good. Bye.